Hey guys, tonight we travel to the frozen wilderness of early Canada and discover how ordinary people survived some of the most brutal winters in human history. Long before central heating, electric blankets and modern winter clothing, settlers, trappers, hunters, and Indigenous peoples faced months of relentless snow, deadly cold, and endless darkness. So dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's drift back in time to explore how people survived the brutal Canadian winters. Imagine waking up on a winter morning in Canada nearly 300 years ago. The sun has not yet risen, and the temperature outside is far below freezing. Thick ice covers the nearby river. Snow lies several feet deep across the landscape, and a cold wind whistles through the forests. The world beyond your small cabin looks silent and beautiful, but it is also incredibly dangerous. For many early settlers, winter was not just an inconvenience. It was a season of survival. One mistake could mean frostbite, starvation, or even death. Families spent much of the warmer months preparing for the long winter ahead. During spring, summer, and autumn, they gathered firewood, dried meat, stored vegetables, repaired buildings, and hunted animals. They knew that once the snow arrived, obtaining supplies would become much more difficult. A typical cabin was built from logs cut from nearby forests. The walls were thick, helping to keep out the cold. Small windows reduced heat loss, and a fireplace remained the heart of the home. Throughout winter, the fire rarely went out. Day and night, someone was responsible for keeping it burning. Even with a roaring fireplace, life was far from comfortable. Cold drafts often slipped through cracks in the walls. Water stored indoors sometimes froze. Blankets made from wool and animal fur provided warmth. But many people still slept wearing several layers of clothing. During especially harsh nights, family members might sleep close together to share body heat. Food was another constant concern. Fresh fruits and vegetables were nearly impossible to find during winter. Instead, families relied on preserved foods. Salted fish, smoked meat, dried beans, root vegetables, and hard bread formed the basis of many meals. The food was simple and repetitive, but it provided the energy needed to survive the freezing temperatures. Outside the settlements, trappers and hunters faced even greater challenges. Some spent weeks travelling through snow-covered forests. They used snowshoes, an ingenious invention developed by Indigenous peoples. Without snowshoes, moving through deep snow could be exhausting or impossible. These lightweight frames spread a person's weight across the snow, allowing them to travel much farther while using less energy. The Indigenous peoples of Canada possessed generations of knowledge about surviving winter. They understood how to build warm shelters, track animals in snowy conditions, and create clothing from animal hides and fur. As winter settled deeper across the Canadian landscape, daily routines became increasingly difficult. Something as simple as fetching water could turn into a dangerous task. Rivers and lakes often froze solid, forcing families to cut holes through thick layers of ice. The work was exhausting, especially during blizzards when powerful winds made the cold feel even harsher. Yet water remained essential for cooking, cleaning, and survival. Blizzards were among the greatest threats during the winter months. These storms could arrive with little warning, covering roads and trails in deep snow. Visibility sometimes dropped to only a few feet. Travellers who became lost during a blizzard often faced terrifying consequences. Many stories tell of hunters and traders wandering through endless white landscapes, struggling to find shelter before exhaustion and cold overtook them. To protect themselves, experienced travellers paid close attention to the weather. They watched the clouds, listened to the wind, and observed animal behaviour. Knowledge passed down through generations could mean the difference between reaching home safely and becoming trapped in the wilderness. For children, winter was both challenging and fascinating. They were expected to help with household chores despite their young age. Boys often assisted with gathering wood, caring for animals, and repairing equipment. Girls frequently helped prepare meals, mend clothing, and care for younger siblings. Everyone contributed because every pair of hands mattered during the long winter season. Clothing played a crucial role in survival. Modern synthetic jackets did not exist. Instead, people relied on layers of wool, leather, and animal fur. Fur-lined boots helped protect feet from freezing temperatures. Mittens were often preferred over gloves because fingers stayed warmer when kept together. Thick hats covered the ears and scarves protected the face from biting winds. Indigenous communities possessed some of the most effective winter clothing in the world. Carefully crafted garments made from caribou, moose, and other animal hides provided remarkable insulation. These designs had been perfected over centuries of experience living in northern climates. European newcomers quickly realized the value of these techniques and adopted many of them. Meanwhile, food supplies had to last until spring. Every meal required careful planning. If stored food ran low, families might be forced to hunt despite dangerous weather conditions. Trappers checked their trap lines for rabbits, foxes, and other animals. Hunters searched for deer or moose, often travelling great distances through forests blanketed in snow. The forests themselves seemed transformed during winter. Snow covered every branch, and silence filled the air. Yet beneath that peaceful appearance, life continued. Wolves moved through the trees searching for prey. Snowshoe hares left tracks across frozen clearings. By late winter metamorphosis, the excitement that sometimes accompanied the first snowfall had long disappeared. Instead, endless weeks of cold, darkness, and routine tested both the body and the mind. Every morning looked much like the one before it. Snow covered the same fields, the same forests, and the same frozen rivers. For settlers living in remote areas, cabin fever became a real challenge. Families spent months in close quarters, often sharing a single room. Privacy was almost non-existent. Small disagreements could quickly become major arguments when there was nowhere else to go. To maintain harmony, many families developed routines that kept everyone occupied throughout the day. Some evenings were devoted to storytelling. Around the fireplace, elders shared tales of distant lands, dangerous journeys, and remarkable survival. Children listened closely as stories passed from one generation to the next. These stories were more than entertainment. They preserved history, taught lessons, and helped people feel connected during the long winter months. In many Indigenous communities, storytelling was also an important part of winter life. Oral traditions carried knowledge that could not be found in books. Stories explained survival techniques, seasonal changes, animal behaviour, and community values. During winter gatherings, these traditions strengthened bonds between families and ensured that important knowledge would continue into future generations. Winter also changed transportation in unexpected ways. While deep snow created challenges, it sometimes made travel easier. Frozen rivers and lakes became natural highways stretching across vast distances. Dog sleds and sledges carried people, supplies, and mail through areas that were difficult to reach during warmer months. The relationship between people and sled dogs was especially important. These animals were not simply pets. They were trusted partners whose strength and endurance often determined whether a journey succeeded or failed. Teams of dogs could travel remarkable distances while pulling heavy loads across frozen landscapes. In many northern regions, survival depended upon them. Yet dangers remained everywhere. Frostbite was a constant threat. Exposed skin could freeze within minutes during extreme cold. Fingers, toes, noses, and ears were particularly vulnerable. People learned to recognize the warning signs: numbness, tingling, and pale skin. Quick action could save tissue from permanent damage. Even more dangerous was hypothermia. As body temperature dropped, victims often became confused and exhausted. Some made fatal mistakes, removing clothing because they felt strangely warm or attempting to rest in the snow. Experienced travellers understood these risks and carefully monitored both themselves and their companions. Wildlife encounters continued throughout winter. As spring slowly approached, people across Canada watched carefully for signs that winter was finally ending. The days became a little longer and the sun climbed slightly higher into the sky. After months of darkness and freezing temperatures, even the smallest change felt encouraging. Snow still covered most of the land, but it no longer seemed as powerful as before. During warmer afternoons, water dripped from rooftops and small patches of ground appeared near cabins. Children were often the first to notice these changes, excited by the promise of warmer days ahead. For many families, the end of winter was a time of relief. Firewood piles had grown smaller after months of constant use. Food stores were often running low. Salted meat, dried fish, and preserved vegetables had helped them survive. But supplies rarely lasted comfortably until spring. The final weeks of winter could be the most difficult period of the entire year. Hunters continued to travel into the forests searching for food. Animal tracks became easier to find as temperatures rose. Rivers remained frozen, but cracks began appearing in the ice. Everyone knew they had to be careful. Ice that seemed solid could suddenly break beneath a person's weight. As conditions improved, people started preparing for the busy months ahead. Tools were repaired, cabins were inspected for damage, and plans were made for planting crops. Winter survival had been the priority for months. But now attention shifted toward rebuilding supplies for the next year. The arrival of birds was one of the most welcome signs of spring. Their songs broke the long silence that had filled the forests all winter. Animals became more active, and the wilderness slowly came back to life. What had once seemed like a frozen world now showed signs of energy and renewal. Looking back, surviving a Canadian winter required remarkable determination. Without electricity, modern heating, or weather forecasts, people relied on experience, preparation, and cooperation. Every piece of firewood mattered. Every stored meal mattered. Every lesson passed from one generation to the next mattered. The brutal winters of early Canada shaped the lives of everyone who experienced them. They taught people patience, resilience, and respect for nature. Those who survived understood that the wilderness could be both beautiful and unforgiving. And so, as the snow finally melted and spring spread across the land, families stepped outside to greet a new season. They had endured months of cold, storms, hunger, and isolation. Another winter had been conquered, and life in the Canadian wilderness could begin once again. Although spring was getting closer, winter still had one final challenge waiting. Late-season storms could arrive without warning, covering the landscape with fresh snow and powerful winds. Many settlers had learned from experience never to trust the weather too early. A warm day could easily be followed by another week of freezing temperatures. Inside their cabins, families continued their daily routines. Fireplaces remained lit from morning until night. Thick blankets still covered beds, and heavy clothing remained necessary whenever someone stepped outside. Even as the sun stayed in the sky longer, the cold remained a constant companion. Many people used this quieter period to repair tools and equipment damaged during winter. Axes were sharpened, sleds were fixed, and hunting gear was prepared for the months ahead. Every item was valuable because replacing broken equipment was often difficult or impossible. For children, the end of winter brought excitement. They looked forward to running through forests, fishing in rivers, and spending more time outdoors. After months spent close to home, the thought of warmer weather filled them with anticipation. As the snow slowly melted, hidden paths began to reappear. Rivers started moving beneath the ice, creating cracking sounds that echoed across the wilderness. Birds returned from the south, and animals became more active. Nature was waking up after its long winter sleep. The people who survived these harsh winters understood something important. Success was not about luck. It came from preparation, hard work, and knowledge passed down through generations. Those lessons helped communities survive in one of the coldest environments on Earth. When spring finally arrived, it felt like a reward earned through patience and endurance. The forests became greener, days became warmer, and life grew easier once again. Yet everyone knew another winter would eventually come. Because in Canada, surviving one winter simply meant preparing for the next. One group of people who knew the Canadian winter better than almost anyone else were the fur traders. These men spent months travelling through vast wilderness areas where there were no roads, no towns, and often no other people for hundreds of miles. Their job was to collect valuable animal furs and transport them to trading posts. A typical journey could last weeks or even months. Fur traders travelled by canoe during warmer seasons, but winter required completely different methods. Snowshoes became essential. Without them, a person could sink deep into the snow with every step, wasting valuable energy. With snowshoes, long distances became possible. Many traders carried only the supplies they could transport themselves. Every item had to be carefully chosen. Food, blankets, tools, and weapons all competed for limited space. Bringing too much meant slower travel. Bringing too little could be deadly. At night, traders often slept outdoors. Instead of comfortable cabins, they built temporary shelters using branches, animal hides, and snow. A small fire provided warmth, but maintaining it through freezing nights required constant attention. If the fire died, temperatures could quickly become dangerous. Food during these journeys was often simple. Dried meat, fish, and a mixture known as pemmican were common. Pemmican combined dried meat with animal fat, creating a lightweight food packed with energy. It could last for long periods and became one of the most important survival foods in northern Canada. Wild animals were always present. Wolves sometimes followed travellers from a distance, while attacks were rare. Their howls during the night reminded people how isolated they truly were. Moose, foxes, rabbits, and countless other animals shared the snowy wilderness. One of the greatest dangers was becoming lost. Forests often looked identical in every direction. During snowstorms, familiar landmarks disappeared completely. Experienced travellers learned to navigate using rivers, stars, and knowledge passed down from Indigenous guides who understood the land better than anyone. Trading posts served as important centres of activity during winter. These remote outposts offered shelter, supplies, and opportunities to exchange furs for goods. After weeks of difficult travel, reaching a trading post felt like arriving at a small island of safety in an ocean of snow. The harshest. Many fur traders continued returning year after year. The work was dangerous and exhausting, but successful traders could earn valuable rewards. More importantly, they developed a deep respect for the Canadian wilderness and the people who had learned to survive within it. The winter landscape demanded patience and skill from everyone who entered it. Whether they were settlers, hunters, Indigenous families, or fur traders, survival depended on understanding the environment. Those who respected nature often survived. Those who underestimated it sometimes never returned home. Another remarkable group that mastered the brutal Canadian winter were the Inuit people of the far north. For thousands of years, they lived in some of the coldest regions on Earth, where temperatures could remain below freezing for most of the year. While many outsiders viewed these frozen lands as impossible places to live, the Inuit developed extraordinary skills that allowed them not only to survive but to thrive. Their knowledge of snow and ice was incredibly detailed. They understood how weather patterns changed, where animals could be found, and how to travel safely across frozen terrain. Every lesson was learned through experience and passed from one generation to the next. One of the most famous Inuit shelters was the snow house, often called an igloo. Contrary to popular belief, these structures were not permanent homes for most families. Instead, they were often used as temporary shelters during hunting trips. Carefully cut blocks of snow were arranged into a dome shape. Surprisingly, the snow acted as insulation, helping trap heat inside. Even when temperatures outside were dangerously cold, the interior could remain much warmer. Clothing was equally important. Inuit hunters wore garments made from caribou and seal skins. These materials provided exceptional warmth while remaining light, enough for travel. Every piece of clothing was designed with survival in mind. A poorly made coat or boot could become a life-threatening problem during extreme weather. Hunting remained the foundation of life throughout the winter. Seals were particularly valuable because they provided meat for food, fat for fuel, and skins for clothing. Hunters often waited patiently beside breathing holes in the ice, sometimes for hours at a time, enduring freezing temperatures while remaining completely still. Patience was one of the most important survival skills in the Arctic. Rushing decisions could waste energy or create dangerous situations. Successful hunters learned to conserve strength and move only when necessary. This careful approach helped them survive conditions that many visitors found overwhelming. Darkness also played a major role in winter life. In some northern regions, daylight became extremely limited. The sun might appear only briefly or remain below the horizon for long periods. Despite this, daily life continued. Families worked, cooked, repaired equipment, and shared stories together. Community cooperation was essential. No one survived completely alone. Food, knowledge, and assistance were often shared among families. During difficult times, these connections helped entire communities endure harsh conditions. Survival was not simply an individual effort. It depended on everyone supporting one another. The Inuit proved that even the coldest parts of Canada could support human life when people understood their environment. Their skills impressed explorers and settlers who entered the north, while Indigenous peoples possessed centuries of experience surviving Canadian winters. European explorers often arrived completely unprepared for what awaited them. Many came from regions with much milder climates and had never experienced cold on such a scale. Their first winters in Canada were often shocking and sometimes disastrous. Early explorers frequently underestimated the length of the season. They expected winter to last a few months, only to discover that snow and freezing temperatures could dominate much of the year. Supplies that seemed sufficient at the beginning of the season often ran out long before spring arrived. One of the greatest challenges was scurvy, a disease caused by a lack of vitamin C during winter. Fresh fruits and vegetables were difficult to obtain. Explorers who relied only on preserved food sometimes became weak and seriously ill. Indigenous communities often knew natural remedies that helped prevent the disease, knowledge that saved many lives. The famous French explorer Samuel de Champlain and his settlers experienced these hardships firsthand. During some winters, large numbers of settlers became sick. Survival depended not only on preparation, but also on learning from the people who already understood the land. Transportation became another major obstacle. Deep snow made walking exhausting, while frozen rivers could be dangerous to cross. Yet these same rivers sometimes became useful winter routes when conditions were stable. Travellers learned that understanding the season was just as important as understanding the geography itself. Mail and communication moved slowly during winter. News from distant settlements might take weeks or months to arrive. Families often had no way of knowing what was happening beyond their local area. Storms could isolate entire communities, leaving people dependent on their own resources. Despite these difficulties, winter also created unexpected opportunities. Frozen rivers allowed traders to reach locations that were difficult to access during other seasons. Hunters found it easier to track animals across snow-covered landscapes. Some communities even looked forward to certain winter activities that strengthened social bonds and brought people together. Still, the cold remained the ultimate challenge. Temperatures could fall so low that metal tools became painful to touch with bare hands. Breath froze into tiny crystals in the air. Trees sometimes cracked loudly during the night as extreme cold affected the wood. These strange sounds reminded everyone how powerful nature could be. Over time, newcomers adapted. They built stronger homes, stored larger food reserves, and adopted many survival techniques developed by indigenous peoples. Each winter taught valuable lessons. Mistakes made one year were corrected the next. Slowly, communities became better prepared for the harsh realities of life in Canada. Among the most feared events during a Canadian winter were the great blizzards. These powerful storms could transform a familiar landscape into a dangerous wilderness within just a few hours. Strong winds lifted snow into the air, creating a white wall that made it almost impossible to see anything ahead. Even experienced travellers sometimes became disoriented during these conditions. Imagine leaving your cabin to gather firewood or check on animals. At first, the weather seems manageable. Then the wind begins to strengthen. Snow starts falling harder and harder. Within minutes, landmarks disappear. The forest, the path home, and even your own footprints vanish beneath fresh snow. Finding your way back becomes a race against time. Many families developed emergency plans for such situations. Ropes were sometimes stretched between buildings so people could safely navigate during storms. Travellers carried extra clothing, food, and tools whenever possible. Experience taught them that preparation was often the difference between survival and disaster. Farm animals also required constant attention. Cows, horses, and chickens depended on people for shelter and food. During severe storms, farmers worked tirelessly to protect their livestock. Losing animals could threaten a family's ability to survive not only the winter but the following year as well. Winter nights often felt endless. After sunset, darkness settled across the snow-covered landscape. Outside, temperatures continued dropping, while icy winds swept across frozen fields and forests. Inside their homes, families gathered around fireplaces, listening to the sounds of the storm beyond the walls. Sometimes the wind became so strong that entire buildings seemed to shake. Snow piled against doors and windows. In the morning, people occasionally discovered that their homes were partially buried beneath deep drifts. Digging pathways through the snow became a regular part of life in some regions. Despite these hardships, winter also brought moments of beauty. On clear nights, the sky sparkled with countless stars. In northern Canada, the aurora borealis, also known as the Northern Lights, painted the sky with moving curtains of green and purple light. For many people, these breathtaking displays provided comfort during the darkest months of the year. Children often remembered these magical sights for the rest of their lives. Even adults paused to admire the beauty of the winter sky. Nature could be harsh and unforgiving, but it could also be extraordinary. As communities grew throughout Canada, people became better at dealing with winter challenges. Roads improved, homes became stronger, and knowledge continued to spread. Yet no amount of preparation could completely remove the power of a Canadian blizzard. Every winter reminded people that nature remained in control. The storms would eventually pass, leaving behind deep snow and a silent landscape. One of the most important resources during a Canadian winter was firewood. Today, heating a home is often as simple as adjusting a thermostat. But for people living centuries ago, staying warm required enormous amounts of physical labour. Long before the first snowfall arrived, families spent months cutting, splitting, and stacking wood. A single household could burn several tons of firewood during one winter. This meant that preparing for cold weather was practically a year-round responsibility. Men, women, and older children often helped gather wood whenever possible. They knew that running out of fuel in the middle of winter could become a life-threatening emergency. The work itself was exhausting. Trees had to be cut down using axes, then chopped into smaller pieces and transported back to the home. During winter, these tasks became more difficult. Snow made movement slower, while freezing temperatures drained energy from the body. Inside the cabin, the fireplace served many purposes. It provided warmth, allowed food to be cooked, dried wet clothing, and offered light during dark evenings. In many ways, the entire household revolved around the fire. Family members naturally gathered near it, especially during the coldest nights. Keeping the fire alive was a constant responsibility. Someone often checked it before going to sleep, and again immediately after waking up. If the flames died during the night, the cabin could become dangerously cold by morning. Rebuilding a fire from scratch while shivering in freezing temperatures was something people tried to avoid whenever possible. Wood was not the only source of heat. Thick blankets, animal furs, and carefully designed clothing helped conserve body warmth. Some families even hung extra fabric along walls and windows to reduce drafts. Every small improvement made winter life a little more comfortable. The smell of wood smoke became a familiar part of daily life. It drifted through settlements and trading posts throughout the season. Travellers approaching a distant cabin often noticed smoke rising from the chimney long before they reached the building itself. That thin trail of smoke represented safety, warmth, and shelter. During particularly cold periods, temperatures sometimes fell below -40 degrees Celsius. At such extremes, even simple tasks became difficult. Water froze quickly, exposed skin could suffer frostbite, and metal tools became painfully cold to touch. People learned to respect these conditions and rarely underestimated them. Yet despite all these hardships, winter also encouraged resilience. Families learned to work together, plan ahead, and appreciate simple comforts. A warm meal, a strong fire, and the company of loved ones felt especially valuable after a day spent battling snow and cold. As another winter night settled across the Canadian wilderness, the glow of fireplaces could be seen through cabin windows. As winter continued across Canada, one of the most important skills people developed was learning to read the signs of nature. Long before weather forecasts existed, survival often depended on recognizing small changes in the environment. Experienced hunters, trappers, and Indigenous guides could sometimes predict approaching storms simply by observing the sky, animals, or the wind. Bird behaviour often provided clues about changing weather. When birds suddenly disappeared or became unusually quiet, it sometimes signalled that a storm was approaching. The movement of clouds, the colour of the sunset, and even the feel of the air could reveal important information to those who knew what to watch for. Animals also adapted in fascinating ways to survive the Canadian winter. Snowshoe hares grew thick white coats that helped them blend into snowy landscapes. Arctic foxes developed dense fur that protected them from extreme cold. Beavers remained inside lodges carefully prepared before winter arrived, relying on food stores hidden beneath the ice. Humans paid close attention to these animals because their survival strategies often offered valuable lessons. Nature itself became a teacher. Those who observed carefully gained knowledge that could help them survive. difficult conditions. Winter travel remained risky, but it was sometimes unavoidable. Traders needed to transport goods, hunters searched for food, and messengers carried important information between settlements. During these journeys, people often travelled in groups for safety. Companions could help if someone became injured, lost, or exhausted. The sound of winter was different from any other season. Snow absorbed many noises, creating an unusual quietness across forests and fields. On calm days, the wilderness seemed almost completely silent. Yet certain sounds stood out clearly. The distant crack of ice, the howl of wolves, or the creaking of frozen trees could travel surprisingly far through the cold air. Nighttime brought another challenge. Temperatures often dropped significantly after sunset. Travellers caught outdoors after dark needed to find shelter quickly. A simple campsite could mean the difference between comfort and danger. Building a fire, creating protection from the wind, and staying dry were essential skills. Despite the hardships, many people came to appreciate certain aspects of winter. The season encouraged planning, patience, and self-reliance. Communities worked together more closely because everyone understood how much they depended on one another. Neighbours helped neighbours. Families supported relatives, and shared knowledge strengthened entire settlements. The winter months also reminded people of nature's immense power. No matter how strong or experienced someone was, the cold demanded respect. Carelessness could have serious consequences. Yet those who prepared properly often discovered that even the harshest conditions could be endured. For many people living in early Canada, winter was measured not by calendars but by daily routines. Each day began with similar tasks. Before sunrise, someone would wake up to check the fire. If the flames had weakened during the night, fresh wood was added immediately. A warm cabin could quickly become cold if the fire was neglected. Breakfast was usually simple. Families often ate porridge, bread, dried fish, or preserved meat. Fresh ingredients were rare during winter, so meals focused on providing enough energy for the long day ahead. Food was never wasted because every stored supply had required months of preparation. After eating, work began. Snow had to be cleared from paths. Animals needed care, and water had to be collected. Even obtaining water could be difficult. Wells sometimes froze, and rivers were covered by thick ice. People often chopped openings into frozen surfaces, just to access water for cooking and drinking. Children learned responsibility at an early age. They helped gather firewood, carried supplies, cared for younger siblings, and assisted with household chores. Winter life left little room for idleness. Every member of the family contributed in some way. The cold influenced every decision. People carefully considered how far they travelled, how much food they consumed, and how much firewood they used. A small mistake might create serious problems weeks later. Because of this, planning became one of the most valuable survival skills. Winter clothing required constant maintenance. Wet boots had to be dried near the fire. Torn gloves needed repair. Snow that melted inside clothing could quickly become dangerous if it froze again. People paid close attention to their equipment because reliable clothing was often the first line of defence against extreme temperatures. Outside, the landscape remained both beautiful and intimidating. Snow-covered hills, forests, and frozen lakes as far as the eye could see. During calm days, the wilderness appeared peaceful. Yet everyone understood how quickly conditions could change. A sudden storm could transform a quiet afternoon into a struggle for survival. Evenings offered a chance to rest. After completing daily tasks, families gathered indoors. Some repaired tools while others prepared meals or shared stories. The warmth of the fire created a sense of security that contrasted sharply with the frozen darkness outside. These simple routines repeated day after day throughout the season. While winter was often difficult, people gradually adapted to its rhythm. They learned when to conserve energy, when to work hard, and when to stay indoors. Survival depended on understanding these patterns and respecting the realities of the environment. Over time, these experiences shaped entire generations. The people who lived through Canada's brutal winters became known for their resilience, patience, and determination. As the weeks passed, people became experts at noticing even the smallest signs that winter was beginning to change. The sun appeared a little earlier each morning and disappeared a little later each evening. These extra minutes of daylight might seem insignificant, but after months of darkness they felt incredibly important. Hunters travelling through the forests noticed changes first. Animal tracks became more common as wildlife grew increasingly active. Birds slowly returned to areas that had been silent throughout the coldest months. The wilderness was preparing for a new season, even if snow still covered much of the ground. For settlers, the approach of spring brought both excitement and hard work. Winter had consumed many of their resources. Firewood stacks were smaller than before. Food supplies often needed careful rationing. Everyone looked forward to the moment when fresh food could once again be gathered, grown, or hunted more easily. The final part of winter sometimes felt longer than the rest of the season combined. People had already endured months of cold weather, yet they still needed patience. Large snowstorms could arrive even when spring seemed close. Experienced Canadians knew that winter rarely surrendered without one last effort. Children watched eagerly for the first signs of melting snow. Small streams appeared where ice had once covered the land. Water flowed beneath frozen surfaces, gradually weakening the thick ice that had dominated rivers and lakes for months. The sounds of dripping water became more common each day. These changes lifted people's spirits. The long period of isolation was nearing its end. Travel would soon become easier. Families would reconnect with neighbours they had not seen for weeks. Trading posts would become busier, and outdoor work would once again fill the days. Yet winter had left its mark. The season had tested everyone. It had demanded preparation, discipline, and resilience. Those who survived understood how important community could be. Neighbours helped one another because they knew that someday they might need help themselves. Many lessons learned during winter remained valuable throughout the year. People remembered the importance of storing food, maintaining equipment, and respecting nature. The wilderness rewarded preparation and punished carelessness. This truth shaped life across Canada for generations. Lebac. It is remarkable how ordinary families managed to thrive in such conditions. Without modern conveniences, they relied on skill, experience, and determination. Every successful winter represented months of planning and hard work. As the snow slowly began to retreat and the promise of spring grew stronger, people felt a sense of accomplishment. They had endured another season of freezing temperatures, fierce storms, and endless nights. Once again, They had proven that human beings could adapt to even the harshest environments. Even after surviving one brutal winter, people knew their struggle was far from over. Canada was a land defined by its seasons, and each year brought another cycle of preparation, endurance, and renewal. Those who lived there understood that winter was not an unusual event. It was simply part of life. As spring finally arrived, settlers immediately began preparing for the next cold season. Trees were cut and stacked months in advance. Crops were planted with the future in mind. Food was preserved whenever possible. The memory of winter remained fresh, reminding everyone how important preparation could be. In more ways, winter shaped the character of the communities that developed across Canada. People learned to be resourceful because they often had no other choice. If something broke, it needed to be repaired. If supplies became scarce, they had to find alternatives. Dependence on distant help was rarely practical. The vast size of Canada made these challenges even greater. Settlements were often separated by enormous distances. Travel between communities could take days or weeks. During winter those even larger. As or result, many people became highly self-reliant and capable of solving problems on their own. Yet self-reliance did not mean isolation. Cooperation remained essential. Neighbours shared tools, knowledge, food, and labour. When a family faced difficulties, others often stepped forward to help. Communities survived because people understood that working together improved everyone's chances of success. Winter also influenced the stories people told. Tales of survival, exploration, and endurance became part of local traditions. Around fireplaces, older generations described famous storms, dangerous journeys, and remarkable escapes from the cold. These stories entertained listeners while also teaching valuable lessons. For explorers and travellers, surviving a Canadian winter often became a source of pride. Those who endured the season earned respect, because everyone understood how demanding it could be. Winter tested patience, courage, and determination more thoroughly than almost anything else. Today, many traces of that history remain. Modern Canadians still experience snowstorms, freezing temperatures, and long winters. However, technology has transformed daily life. Heated homes, insulated clothing, reliable transportation, and weather forecasting make winter far less dangerous than it once was. Yet the stories of the past remain fascinating because they reveal what ordinary people were capable of achieving. Faced with extreme conditions, they adapted, learned, and persevered. Their experiences remind us that human beings can survive extraordinary challenges when they combine knowledge, preparation, and resilience. And so, the history of Canada's brutal winters is not only a story about snow and cold, it is also a story about human determination. There was another challenge that people faced during Canadian winters. Time itself seemed to move differently. During the coldest months, days often followed the same pattern. Snow covered the landscape for weeks at a time, and the view outside the window changed very little. This routine could make winter feel much longer than it actually was. For settlers living in remote cabins, patience became one of the most valuable skills of all. They learned not to focus on how much winter remained. Instead, they concentrated on the tasks of each day. The what? Maintain the fire. Prepare food. repair clothing, care for animals. These small responsibilities gave structure to life and helped the season pass more quickly. In northern regions, the effect was even more dramatic. Daylight could become extremely limited, with only a few hours of sunlight appearing each day. The sun stayed low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the snow. Some days felt more like an extended twilight than a true daytime. Yet people adapted remarkably well. Candles, oil lamps, and fireplaces provided light during dark evenings. Families created routines that fit the season. Work continued indoors when outdoor conditions became too severe. Winter demanded flexibility, and successful communities learned how to adjust. Visitors from warmer climates were often surprised by how quiet winter could be. Fresh snow absorbed sound, creating a calm and peaceful atmosphere. Forests seemed to stand completely still beneath their blankets of white. On windless nights, the silence could feel almost magical. Of course, that silence was occasionally broken by nature itself. Ice on lakes and rivers sometimes shifted with loud cracking sounds. Snow slid from rooftops. Wolves howled in the distance. Strong winds swept through trees, creating eerie noises that echoed across the landscape. Many people developed a deep respect for these winter sounds. They became part of daily life, reminders that nature remained active even during its coldest season. Experienced residents could often identify weather changes simply by listening carefully to the world around them. As winter slowly progressed, signs of endurance appeared everywhere. Firewood stacks that had seemed enormous in autumn gradually became smaller. Well-travelled paths formed between cabins and barns. Clothing showed signs of repair after months of use. These details told the story of people adapting to their environment, one day at a time. What is perhaps most impressive is that generations of Canadians did more than survive winter. They built entire lives around it. Communities expanded, trade routes developed, and families continued settling new areas despite the challenges. Winter was difficult, but it never stopped people from pursuing their goals. The season demanded effort and sacrifice. Yet it also created strong communities and resilient individuals. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about surviving a Canadian winter was how ordinary it eventually became. For newcomers, the first winter often felt overwhelming. The deep snow frambeurs and endless nights seemed almost impossible to endure. But after living through several seasons, many people began to view winter differently. They learned when the first major snowfall would likely arrive. They understood how much firewood was needed to last until spring. They knew which areas of a river froze safely and which remained dangerous. Experience transformed fear into knowledge, and knowledge made survival easier. Winter preparation became part of everyday life. During summer and autumn, families were already thinking about the cold months ahead. Vegetables were preserved, meat was dried, tools were repaired, and wood was gathered. Success in winter often depended on decisions made many months earlier. This cycle repeated year after year. Children grew up watching their parents prepare for winter, and eventually they taught the same skills to their own children. Knowledge passed from generation to generation, becoming part of community traditions and local culture. The landscape itself seemed to participate in this rhythm. During autumn, forests changed colour before losing their leaves. Animals prepared shelters or stored food. Lakes slowly froze as temperatures dropped. Every part of nature appeared to understand that winter was approaching. For many people, winter also offered rare moments of reflection. Farming work slowed, travel became less frequent, and long evenings encouraged conversation. Families spent more time together than during other seasons. Stories, memories, and traditions were shared around the warmth of the fire. Some settlers even came to appreciate certain aspects of winter. The snow-covered landscape possessed a beauty unlike any other season. Moonlight reflected off frozen fields, creating a silver glow across the countryside. On clear nights, the stars appeared bright and endless above the silent wilderness. The northern lights sometimes danced across the sky in shades of green and purple. Those fortunate enough to witness them often described the experience as unforgettable. In moments like these, winter revealed not only its hardships but also its beauty. Still, no one forgot how dangerous the season could be. Every winter brought new storms, unexpected challenges, and difficult decisions. Respect for nature remained essential. Overconfidence could be costly, while preparation and caution often ensured success. As Canada continued to grow, winter remained one of the country's defining features. It shaped transportation, architecture, clothing, food storage, and daily life. Entire communities developed around the realities of living in a cold climate. The story of Canada's brutal winters is ultimately a story about adaptation. Human beings entered a harsh environment and learned how to thrive within it. As the 19th century progressed, technology slowly began to change life in Canada. But winter remained a powerful force. Railways connected distant communities, allowing supplies and people to travel more efficiently than ever before. Yet even these impressive machines were not immune to snow and ice. Heavy snowstorms could block railway tracks for days. Workers often spent countless hours clearing snowdrifts, so trains could continue moving. In some regions, enormous walls of snow formed alongside the tracks, creating corridors through the winter landscape. Travel became easier than in previous centuries, but nature still demanded respect. Small towns continued to depend heavily on preparation. General stores stocked extra supplies before winter arrived. Families purchased flour, salt, sugar, and other necessities that might be difficult to obtain once heavy snow covered the roads. Planning ahead remained one of the most important winter skills. Doctors faced unique challenges as well. When someone became sick during winter, reaching medical assistance could be difficult. Deep snow and severe weather sometimes delayed travel for days. Communities often relied on local knowledge and home remedies until professional help could arrive. Teachers and students experienced their own winter routines. Children frequently walked long distances to attend school, even in cold conditions. Snow-covered paths and frozen roads became part of everyday life. Schoolhouses were heated by wood stoves, and students sometimes took turns helping maintain the fire throughout the day. Mail delivery also required determination. Postal workers travelled through difficult weather to connect remote communities with the outside world. Letters carried news from family members, business partners, and friends. During long winters, these messages became especially meaningful. Winter sports gradually emerged as a way for people to enjoy the season, rather than simply endure it. Activities such as skating, sledding, and hockey became increasingly popular. What had once been viewed only as a difficult season slowly gained a new reputation as a time for recreation and community events. Even so, the reality of winter remained unchanged. Temperatures could still plunge far below freezing. Storms could still disrupt daily life. Snow and ice continued shaping transportation, work, and social activities across the country. What made Canada unique was not the existence of winter itself, but the way people adapted to it. Generation after generation found creative solutions to the challenges they faced. They built stronger homes, developed better clothing, improved transportation, and shared knowledge with those around them. The result was a culture deeply connected to the changing seasons. Winter influenced traditions, habits, and even national identity. It taught people patience when storms, delayed their plans, and resilience when conditions became difficult. Perhaps one of the greatest tests of a Canadian winter was not the cold itself, but the uncertainty it created. People never knew exactly how severe a season would become. Some winters were relatively mild, while others brought record-breaking snowfall, powerful storms, and temperatures that seemed almost impossible to endure. A family entering winter could prepare carefully and still face unexpected challenges. A supply of firewood might prove smaller than expected. Hunting could become difficult if animal populations changed. A storm might damage buildings or delay important travel. Survival often depended on the ability to adapt when plans went wrong. This uncertainty encouraged people to think ahead. Experienced settlers rarely prepared for an average winter. Instead, they prepared for the worst winter they could imagine. Extra food, extra firewood, and extra clothing were considered necessities rather than luxuries. The landscape itself seemed transformed by snow. Familiar roads disappeared beneath white drifts. Rivers became frozen highways. Fields that had once produced crops now lay hidden beneath thick blankets of ice and snow. Every season created an entirely different world. Visitors often described the Canadian wilderness as both beautiful and intimidating. Endless forests stretched toward the horizon. Mountains rose above frozen valleys. Lakes became vast sheets of ice. The scale of the landscape made people feel small, especially during winter when nature appeared at its most powerful. Yet people continued exploring, settling, and building communities across this immense territory. They established farms, trading posts, villages, and eventually cities. Each new settlement represented a victory over distance, climate, and isolation. Winter also inspired innovation. People constantly searched for better ways to stay warm, travel efficiently, and protect their homes. New building techniques were developed. Improved clothing designs appeared. Transportation methods evolved to meet the demands of snowy conditions. Over generations, these improvements made life easier, but they never completely removed winter's influence. Even modern Canadians continue adjusting their routines when snowstorms arrive. Schools close, roads become difficult to travel, and communities come together to manage the challenges of severe weather. In many ways, this connection between people and winter has become part of Canada's identity. The season is more than just a period of cold weather. It is a shared experience that has shaped history, culture, and daily life for centuries. Looking back at the experiences of settlers, Indigenous peoples, hunters, trappers, explorers, and families, one lesson appears again and again. survival was rarely the result of strength alone. It came from preparation, cooperation, patience, and respect for the natural world as another. Cold night settled across the snow-covered land. The stars shone brightly above the frozen forests. As we reach the final part of our journey through Canada's brutal winters, it is worth remembering just how extraordinary these experiences truly were. For modern people, winter is often an inconvenience. We step into heated buildings, drive warm vehicles, and check weather forecasts with a simple glance at a phone. But for those who lived centuries ago, winter was something entirely different. It was a season that demanded respect every single day. A season that tested preparation, patience, and courage. Every snowfall, every frozen river, and every icy wind reminded people that survival could never be taken for granted. Yet despite these hardships, people continued building lives across Canada. They planted farms where forests once stood. They established trading routes through wilderness areas. They raised children, formed communities, and created traditions that lasted for generations. Winter challenged them, but it did not stop them. Perhaps that is why these stories remain so fascinating today. They reveal the incredible adaptability of human beings. Faced with conditions that seem almost unimaginable, people found solutions. They learned from one another, shared knowledge, and developed skills that allowed them to thrive. Indigenous peoples passed down centuries of wisdom about surviving in cold climates. Explorers learned valuable lessons through experience. Settlers adapted their homes, clothing, and daily routines to fit the environment around them. Together, these efforts created a rich history of resilience and determination. The Canadian winter also taught an important lesson about nature. Human beings could not control the season, but they could learn to live with it. Success came not from fighting the environment, but from understanding it. Those who respected nature's power often survived. Those who ignored it sometimes paid a heavy price. Today, traces of this history can still be found across Canada. Old cabins, historic trading posts, and stories passed down through. Families all serve as reminders of a time when winter shaped nearly every aspect of life. Though technology has changed the way people experience the season, the legacy of those earlier generations remains. And now, as our story comes to a close, imagine one final winter evening in the Canadian wilderness. Snow falls gently across the frozen landscape. The forests stand silent beneath the stars. A warm fire glows inside a small cabin, where a family rests after another long day. Outside, winter continues its endless journey across the land. Inside, people feel gratitude for warmth, food, and companionship. They know spring will eventually return, just as it always has. Until then, they will face the cold with the same resilience that has carried generations through the long Canadian winter. And with that peaceful image in mind, our journey through the history of Canada's brutal winters comes to an end. But before we completely leave the frozen landscapes of Canada, there is one more fascinating chapter worth exploring. Throughout the 19th century, some of the most isolated people in the country lived far beyond the reach of growing cities and towns, deep in the forests, along remote rivers, and near the edge of the Arctic. Small groups of families continued to experience winter much as their ancestors had, generations before. For these people, modern conveniences arrived very slowly. A family living hundreds of miles from the nearest town could not simply purchase supplies whenever they needed them. Every winter still required careful planning and preparation. When the first snow arrived, travel routes changed dramatically. Trails that were muddy and difficult during summer often became easier to cross once they froze solid. Frozen lakes and rivers turned into natural highways connecting distant settlements. Dog sleds carried mail, supplies, and travellers across vast distances that would have been impossible to cross on foot. The people who guided these sleds possessed remarkable skill. They understood snow conditions, weather patterns, and the behaviour of their dogs. During storms, visibility could disappear entirely. Experienced drivers sometimes relied on instinct and years of knowledge to find their way through the wilderness. Mail delivery in winter became an adventure of its own. Important letters travelled through forests, across frozen rivers, and over snow-covered hills. Delivering a simple message could require days of travel through dangerous conditions. Yet these journeys helped connect isolated communities to the rest of the country. Life remained challenging, but many people appreciated the independence it offered. They hunted, fished, trapped animals, and gathered resources from the land around them. Winter was difficult, but it was also familiar. It shaped their routines, traditions, and understanding of the world. As another snowfall covered the forests and frozen lakes of Canada, these remote communities continued their quiet existence. Far from busy cities, they lived according to the rhythms of nature, just as countless generations had done before them. The winter wind swept across the wilderness, carrying with it the same cold that had challenged explorers, settlers, hunters, and indigenous peoples for centuries. And in that endless landscape of snow and ice, the story of Canada's brutal winters continued, one season after another. One particularly difficult aspect of winter life in Canada was dealing with isolation. Today, people can communicate instantly with almost anyone in the world. Centuries ago, however, a heavy snowfall could effectively separate a family from the outside world for weeks at a time. Imagine living in a small cabin surrounded by forests. The nearest neighbour might be several miles away. The nearest town could be even farther. Once winter storms arrived, travel became slower and far more dangerous. In some cases, families simply stayed where they were and waited for better conditions. This isolation encouraged self-sufficiency. People learned to repair their own tools, sew their own clothing, and solve their own problems. If something broke during the middle of winter, there was often no one available to fix it except the people living in the cabin. Yet isolation also created strong bonds within families and communities. When neighbours finally met after a long period apart, they shared news, supplies, and stories. These gatherings became important, social events that helped people feel connected despite the enormous distances separating them. Winter markets and trading posts often served as centres of community life. Travellers arriving after long journeys exchanged goods and information. News about weather, hunting conditions, and distant settlements spread from person to person. In an era before modern communication, these conversations were incredibly valuable. For many children, winter memories lasted a lifetime. They remembered the sounds of snow crunching beneath boots, the warmth of fireplaces after a cold day outdoors, and the excitement of seeing the first signs of spring. What seemed ordinary at the time later became treasured memories, animals also played a crucial role in helping people survive. Horses transported supplies, dogs pulled sleds, and livestock provided food and other resources. Caring for animals during winter required significant effort, but their contribution often made survival much easier as the years passed. Countless generations gained experience living with winter rather than fighting against it. They understood when to travel and when indoors. These lessons became part of everyday life and helped communities endure conditions that many outsiders considered impossible. Perhaps that is the true story of Canada's brutal winters. It is not simply a story about cold weather. It is a story about adaptation. Human beings entered a challenging environment and gradually learned how to thrive within it. Through patience, preparation, and cooperation, they transformed hardship into a way of life. Even today, when snow falls across Canada's forests, mountains, and frozen lakes, it connects the present to the past. The same winter that challenged explorers and settlers centuries ago still returns each year, reminding everyone of the remarkable history hidden beneath the snow-covered landscape. As our journey through the frozen history of Canada slowly comes to an end, take all momentum. Imagine the countless people who once stood beneath those cold northern skies. Settlers, hunters, trappers, explorers, and Indigenous families all face the same winter wanes, the same deep snow, and the same long nights. Many of them never became famous. Their names were never written in history books, yet they played an important role in shaping the Canada we know today. Every cabin they built, every trail they cleared, and every winter they survived helped create communities that would grow for generations. Winter taught these people lessons that could not be learned anywhere else. It taught patience when storms lasted for days. It taught preparation when supplies ran low. It taught courage when travelling across frozen wilderness. Most importantly, it taught people to rely on one another. The snow-covered forests of Canada witnessed countless stories of hardship and determination. Some winters were remembered for powerful blizzards. Others were remembered for extraordinary acts of survival. Through it all, people continued moving forward, trusting that spring would eventually return. And return it always did, no matter how long the winter lasted. No matter how deep the snow became, the sun always climbed higher in the sky. Rivers eventually broke free from their icy grip. Birds returned from distant lands. Trees awakened from their winter sleep. Life began again. Perhaps that is the most comforting lesson hidden within the story of Canada's brutal winters. Difficult seasons do not last forever. The longest night eventually gives way to morning. The coldest winter eventually welcomes spring. Tonight, as you rest in comfort, far removed from the frozen cabins and snowy forests of the past, you can appreciate the remarkable resilience of those who came before us. Their lives were not easy, but their determination allowed them to endure challenges that seem almost unimaginable today. Now the fires have burned low. The wind outside has grown quiet. Snow continues to drift gently across the silent Canadian wilderness. The forests rest beneath a blanket of white, and the stars shine softly above the frozen landscape. So let your thoughts drift away like snowflakes carried by a winter breeze. Leave behind the long trails, the distant cabins, and the endless northern forests. The people of this story have finally reached the warmth of spring, and our journey through their world has reached its peaceful end. Thank you for joining me on this quiet journey through history. Sleep well, rest peacefully, and I'll see you in the next story. Good night.